On today's episode of the Unselects, Shrewsbury Incorporated. Is the town a business?
Guess what? It's a private club, and you're not invited. I'm Brian Costello.
And I'm Gregg Richards, and we are the Unselects. Okay, in today's episode, we're going to dive deep into the strategic plan of Shrewsbury. They talk about it a lot. We're coming up here on the fiscal year start. They're going to set some goals next year. But I want to go back and talk about where it comes from. Like, where did this Shrewsbury's plan come from and what's behind it? So we have to go back a little bit here and back all the way to 2015. And we're going to talk a little bit about community compacts that were created by the Baker administration. So let's just watch a quick video here on what those look like.
Today, Lieutenant Governor Polito will be in West Springfield for a meeting with the mayor there, but first, she'll be right here in Chicopee at City Hall for a meeting there with Mayor Richard Koss. At today's meetings, the mayors are scheduled to sign a community compact agreement. These agreements are part of Governor Charlie Baker's first executive orders that he signed at the start of this year. Since then, the Baker administration has been meeting with cities and towns about their individual needs. Lieutenant Governor Karen Polito is the chair of the Community Compact Cabinet. On the state's website, she describes the agreement as a way to create clear mutual standards, expectations, and accountability.
I mean, the surface, I don't have a problem with, clear accountability, mutual expectations, but did you notice what it said there at the end?
Better government?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's not going to happen. Nobody has ever said in the old days, right? Was it Reagan who said, I'm from the government, I'm here to help?
Right.
It never happens.
No. And what they actually ended up being, I'll just fast forward here a little bit. We did sign in Shrewsbury a community compact with the state. And one thing I'm highlighting here is about regionalization and best practice sharing, right? This was the whole concept. Hey, finite resources, we want to share, we want to be more effective. But in reality, this is just another tool, as we've shown, to direct grants and force people to do things that either another group wants, whether it's the state or the federal government. You shall do things our way. This one is a little bit more of a carrot approach. If you do things our way, we'll give you money instead of I'll take it away if you don't. But fundamentally, sign up for this, and then there's grant money available.
Yeah, the idea I think behind it, and Governor Baker, primarily a business guy, right? I think his thought process was, well, companies have these plans and they follow them, but in reality, this is sort of central planning that would make, Brezhnev blush.
Right. And the reason I'm bringing this one up is that our strategic planning process was driven by grants, which we'll see in a video coming up in a little bit more detail. But I did want to highlight, hey, when they talk about a community compact grant, what the heck are we talking about? That's what we're talking about. The other piece I want to make sure everybody's aware of, that the vision statement of Shrewsbury, which is that Shrewsbury is a vibrant, inclusive, collaborative community where all can thrive. And that last word, thrive, is going to be a reoccurring theme here that I want everybody to dig into. So the first thing we want to kind of go through, I think we're going to look at a clip coming up here. And this was just back in 2022, talking a little bit about where we're spending some additional ARPA funds, and then I'll explain how this ties back into regionalization and some things like that. So let's take a quick listen.
First, with regards to the communications strategic plan, using ARPA funds, of course, the board commissioned the review of the town's communication practices and the development of a strategic approach to ensure we're providing all residents with the opportunity to receive information from the town and engage with the town when possible. We have begun to move from the project planning stage with the UMass Collins Center to review the communication practices of the town.
Okay, I just want to highlight UMass Collins Center, and the other thing he said there was ARPA funds. So we were using American Rescue Plan Act, so our tax dollars because of COVID, to go to ensure we can communicate better with our citizens. What does that have to do with COVID?
Actually, absolutely nothing. Yeah, there's nothing it has to do with. It was money that our money,
yes, our
and
money.
Other people's money, some
Right.
guy in Iowa,
Right.
is paying for this for us to be able to somehow speak to our own residents better.
But I interesting about the Collins Center, which I looked into here, right? It is a center designed to help government work better that was created by, drumroll, the legislature, right? So I love when they say, okay, you're going to ensure that you do better by having the same people who don't do very well tell you how to be better. And the actual Edward Collins himself, they really hype him up as a public servant, which he very well may be. He may be a nice man. I don't know the man. But just look at his background. He worked for the Department of Revenue in Massachusetts. He was a selectman and town manager in Saugus. And then he was a CFO for Boston. I mean, nothing says helping government work better than a lifelong bureaucrat.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, the Collins Center should just say, federal grants to tell people that federal government and state government are good for you.
Exactly. And what I want to actually show here is the dean. We're going to go into a clip here with the dean of the Collins Center to have him explain what he thinks one of their founding principles. Actually, I think he refers to it as a dogma of the center. So let's take a listen.
Regionalization, therefore, is one of the principal focuses of the Collins Center on Public Management, what some of its people refer to as a dogma of the Collins Center. And we will be working with city and town officials, we'll be working with state government, we'll be working with other academics to promote and market and implement regionalized solutions to service delivery across the Commonwealth and maybe beyond that.
I want to ask you a question about the last part he said. What does he mean when he says maybe beyond that? So regionalized, meaning services, that would be education, fire, police. Where would it be beyond, let's say, in Massachusetts for residents of Massachusetts?
I think what he refers to, in my mind, is any place that they could get their fingers into to standardize everything, right? You shouldn't have a particular town character. You shouldn't have a particular town view. Everybody should kind of have that same view that is approved by this dean who probably makes $500,000 a year.
Or more. Yeah, and I think the whole concept, I mean, on the surface, right, from that business lens, I'm all for being more efficient, but like you say, we've never seen it. So just to say, well, we're doing this because we're going to be more efficient in government and spend less money, I don't believe it. On the surface, it sounds great, but what I want to kind of focus on here is it really alludes to this centralized power, because regionalizing takes control and power away from the individual residents or the towns and puts it somewhere else, right? Yeah. Where you no longer have a say because that's the way we do things. You see it in corporate America, right? A lot of people get frustrated with large companies. In my past life too, where, you wanted to do something on a local level. Well, you can't do it that way because Milwaukee has to make that decision or something like that. This is a similar thing, fair?
Yeah, and I think you said earlier, they've taken more of a carrot approach. I would argue it's the carrot, but in the back is the stick, right? They went first with the carrot because you can get all these grants, and then it will be, as we've seen with 3A and other things, it's the stick, which is now you're going to lose all these things you've now agreed through a compact or through something else because you've already agreed to regionalization, right. And therefore we're going to take these things away from you.
Right. So now we're going to go to Shrewsbury specifically and our strategic plan, right? We're going to go back to town meeting. This is 2021, and this is where, at the time, Chairman John Samia is talking about a little readout of their progress that we've made to date here. So let's take a listen.
As you recall, the May 2021 annual town meeting appropriated $99,000 for the Board of Selectmen to undertake a multi-year visioning and strategic planning initiative. This resulted in direction to the town manager for the following. First, conduct a survey to benchmark residents' opinions and the town's performance in comparison to similar communities in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and across the country. The town will partner with Polco to conduct a national community survey within the coming months.
Okay. So let's take a look quick here. He mentioned the first step was to be a national survey from a company called Polco. So I want to hit upon that really quick here on 2 points. Number one, this is a local strategic plan for a town. So we're going to use a national survey to understand what we should be doing on a local level. And secondly, because let's say this company has done this survey across all of the country, I mean, does anybody think that is going to be unique to Shrewsbury?
Yeah, it's the mentality of what your parents always told you not to do, which is if everybody jumped off a bridge, would you? Right? And I think they've decided to go with probably, I would imagine, Polko is used by thousands. It says tried and trusted
It's
all over the country.
Tried and trusted.
Right? And so they're used by so many. They've got the money. They probably got federal money, grants, and everything else, and now they're approved to be doing this.
Right. And the other part I want to touch upon is that statement about Polko as a trusted ICMA partner. All right. Well, let's dig into ICMA, okay? Because this is going to be a very important theme throughout today. All right. So ICMA is the International City Council Management Association. All right. And if you look at it there, they're dedicated to creating and sustaining thriving communities throughout the world. So there's that thriving piece again. So that is the essentially a trade group, right? And that's why we're saying Shrewsbury Inc. Like a trade group, you would have like, the Automotive Society of America or the International Society of Pharmaceutical Engineers. Well, you have the City Council Management Association as well.
Yeah.
Right. So once again, our statement there, we're thrive, and you see the thriving coming up again. I'm just going to always be coming back to that vision statement because, shockingly, I don't think a lot of residents would tell you what the vision statement was if you asked them, right? So I want to go in here to a clip just to show you how connected our town is, because you say, okay, ICMA, so what? Well, our town manager, and I think many members of town have attended this ICMA or been part of the organization. So let's listen to comments about that from town manager Kevin Mizikar.
Like another part of like the exceptional category, you and I also got to go to ICMA down in Austin.
That's ICMA. I mean, obviously a lot of great educational opportunities. I think it was the largest ICMA, International City County Managers Association conference, over 5,000 conferees that were there. So just a ton of learning opportunities and networking opportunities. Everyone that I've gone to have been really rewarding, and that one certainly wasn't short on new ideas and opportunities for us to bring back to the community.
There's nothing wrong. Nothing wrong with going to a conference, but my experience with conferences are sponsors, partners, such as this Polko, right? The only reason you're a partner or sponsor, right, is for sales, to increase revenue. So you sign up as a partner, you become a partner, you go to the conference, you present in a breakout room, and you show, hey, here's a white paper, or here's a success story of how we use this survey to do whatever. And then everybody in the room's like, well, this looks great. How do we do this at home? I mean, you've been to a lot of these things. Would you say it's similar?
I speak at a lot of conferences. I do a lot of conferences, and in these public conferences, what you see is exactly that, right? There was probably a panel with another town meeting, probably a town manager doing a presentation with one of these
Right.
these sponsors, and it was a case study, right? It's also a great opportunity for people looking for jobs. So basically, you're paying for your town managers to go and find their next opportunity, right?
Right.
I agree. Education is important.
Yes.
I think sometimes this, my bet is this is more boondoggle than education, and there's a lot of sales of these types of companies out there.
Absolutely. One last piece, that our town manager is a credentialed manager with ICMA, so he does get reoccurring training, and there must be benefit. But to your point, I think part of it is, and I'm not faulting him for it, is at some point in time, if he wants to take another job at someplace outside of Shrewsbury, at a city or bigger city or government agency, a lot of this is going to benefit him. So I'm not faulting our town manager for doing it. I'm just trying to point out that when you look at when it's really a strategic plan about what's best for residents, what does that look like? Because if you look at this next slide, the reason why we went down this path was to, have a stronger relationship between the community and local government by a shared set of priorities, all right, which would indicate that our priorities as residents would be very important.
I think the shared priorities are shared with the greater international community in their minds, rather than shared priority with the individuals in the town, because creating a relationship with your town's people should be pretty easy if you're the town manager or a select board member or a planning board member.
Absolutely. So let's look at the results from the survey just real quick. You see this a lot, right? When you do this, there's a lot of numbers they put out there. Hey, we sent out 14,000 postcards. We had all these emails and we got a bunch of responses. And the one thing I always want to say about surveys is they're always specifically around topics. In this particular case, there's a wheel there that there's 11 areas they talk about. And I always try to use an analogy. If you've ever been to a mentalist, right, or a magician, right, where they make you perceive that you have control or that the decisions that you're making are truly independent, right? But a lot of these, I always say, they're forcing you into an answer that fits in a bucket, because a lot of times there's none of the above, or I don't agree with this question. It's out of these three, which are most important? And to you might say none.
But that's not an option.
That's not an option.
Yeah.
So look at the chart. And the only reason I put this little, I know it's a little eye chart here, but there was 11 items. There's 5 on the right. So this is a level of importance to the residents of Shrewsbury based off residents' feedback is on the right. And the actual quality of perception of how it is today is on the y-axis up and down. So if you look on the right, the most important things to residents were common sense, as we've talked about in the past in other episodes, utilities, economy, safety, natural resources, and parks and recreation.
Yeah. I think we were speaking before I saw this slide, and I think I hit four of the 5 without ever taking that survey, because they're common sense.
Right.
They're absolutely what normal people, you could just ask people around town. You didn't have to pay $99,000. You actually could have just asked people. And I think your average person would say, well, I'd love a park. I'd love to have security and safety, good roads, some maybe good utilities, stuff like that.
So those, based off that
Schools.
feedback, we should see those 5, right, be front and center in the actual strategic objectives or in the strategic plan to ensure that those are what we're focused on, correct?
Absolutely.
Fair?
Right.
Okay, well, let's see if that's what actually ends up happening. Next thing we're going to go is part 2 of when John Sammy is talking about the second phase. So we did the survey, and now there's a second consultant engagement. So let's take a listen.
Second, to solicit proposals from experienced consultants to help facilitate a community-engaged visioning process to have residents define their ideal Shrewsbury in 2030 and develop a strategic plan to get there. During this process, the town manager and his team secured a $50,000 grant through the Commonwealth's Community Compact Program, which will help offset the cost of those 2 key initiatives. At the Board of Selectmen's meeting on October 12th, the board authorized the town manager to engage in contract negotiations with Raftellus. Raftellus has worked with over 600 local government agencies in 46 states on similar projects. The Board of Selectmen recognizes the importance of community engagement and strategic planning.
Once again, consultant, worked with 46 states, have done this a million times, right? So let's look a little quick here, and then we'll get back to talking about the plan specifically, about who this Raftellus is and how they market themselves. Let's take a quick watch.
What if all American cities, counties, and towns had the resources they need to provide efficient and well-planned services that anticipate future needs? We are Raftellus, and we share our clients' goals to make these visions a reality. So who is Raftellus? We are financial consultants and Excel masters. We're process perfecters and business counselors. We're visual communicators and group facilitators. We're software developers and graphics gurus. We're community connectors and so much more. Raftellus. We're trusted advisors to the public sector since 1993.
Comments?
We're roller skaters, tennis courts. We're bad basketball players in driveways. That is about the fluffiest thing I've ever seen. They said nothing without really saying anything other than, well, one thing I did notice, which I did find funny, is in that first part of that video, which is over that idyllic little town.
Yes.
All I could picture was our planning board thinking that would look great with a 500,000 square foot warehouse right there. But yeah, it's a fluffy thing.
Yeah.
You know, we're Raftellus. We'll say what you want. It's the same consultants, the same people, the
Yeah.
same words in 46 states and 600 towns.
And here's the map of everywhere they've served, right? So you see it here too. It says 25% of the U.S. population has been engaged with a Raftellus engagement, right? So once again, they've done this a lot, and just from an efficiency and profitability standpoint of a company, are you really going to have individual and never reuse anything?
No, you know, I use this statement in my day job, but it's true with consulting firms, right? Consulting firms are primarily there to do as little work as possible for as much money as possible, right? That's not a negative thing. They have to reuse everything they've done previously. They'll argue that's experience, but what you tend to get is a really generic thing when you really wanted, you think you were getting a specific thing.
Absolutely. And what specific thing did we get? We got a strategic plan. So just as a refresh, that is a copy of it. You can go download it from the website, mentioning the history and how the process was. One of the key things that came out of here is this graphic, all right? So if you look at it, it defined strategic outcomes: thriving, engaged and connected, sustainable, exceptional, prosperous. Very fluffy, high-level words that on the surface don't really mean anything, right? And then there's our vision again, all right? So let's remember that one. Those strategic outcome areas, we're going to highlight those because if you remember, we talked about in the survey, there was 5 bullets, and I don't see anything jumping out at me. Now, under the hood, I think they might be under there, but they're classified in that manner. Now, speaking of Raftellus, I went and I looked at other engagements Raftellus did across the country. And so that's Shrewsbury's right there. This is Lisle, Illinois, which is a neighboring town to where I live. Now, if you look at their vision statement, they're not exactly the same words, but guess what's in there? Thrive. Then, Charlottesville, Virginia. Look, to be a place where everyone thrives.
Thrives.
Oh, and then there's Westboro, right? Where it's a similar graphic. So this whole same thing. So when you talk about our vision even, let's look at vision statements, all right? Where all can thrive. Lisle is a community-oriented village where residents of business thrive. Caribous County, neighbors thrive and community prospers. Midland County, Michigan, an exceptional place where everyone thrives. Like, okay, now we'll look here. We have 2 of our strategic initiatives, prosperous and sustainable. But let's look, prosperous, it shows up on ours. Charlottesville, Virginia, economic prosperity. City of Lafayette, Louisiana, economic prosperity. Sustainable, climate action, environmental stewardship. Is this the same plan?
Yeah, they basically have pods, if you think about it, right? So the consultant decides to pick the pods that are going to go in to the specific slide. So there's only so many pods, and they just choose the ones that they believe that the town wants to hear, right? So they're slightly different, but basically they're all the same.
Right, and they're going to argue that, you don't understand. We had a retreat, right? And we had sticky notes on the wall. We had whiteboards. We had made a lot of notes. And in that same thing, those facilitators go back to what I'm saying. I'm not calling them the magicians, but they forcing you down. Maybe, do you ever guys consider thriving? Oh, I love the word thriving. How about prosperity? Yeah, let's use prosperity.
They use the same words, right?
Right.
Somebody might be saying something else in the meeting, but you're right. Somebody writes on the sticky board. You've been in these meetings,
Yes,
right?
of course.
The facilitator has the absolute ability to bring you in the direction they want to bring you.
Exactly.
You know,
exactly.
they're the dungeon master if you've ever played Dungeons and Dragons, I guess.
Right. And this reuse is not a new thing, okay? We're going to go to a clip, or we're going to show a clip here of Rosa Corey. Now, Rosa Corey, was in California, commercial real estate appraiser. She was really involved and expert in land use, in planning, and in this concept of sustainable development. So I just want to kind of listen to what she says about plans and the consistency of them across the country.
We have consultants who are charging millions of dollars for this plan that is the same plan all across the country and all across the world. Millions of dollars. Think about this. Your small economies are shrinking all the time. More and more rules and regulations for agricultural people, more and more rules and regulations for industrial people. Your constituents are struggling to keep their heads above water. And then your government, your local governments are paying consultants for these plans. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars are going to consulting firms for these plans.
Yeah, it's grant money, right? Now, some would argue, oh, it's just grant money. But once again, it is our tax dollars. And you're telling me there's nothing else we could spend the money on? I mean, we don't have a system at town meeting that can track how town meeting members vote, but we
Yeah.
can pay for the same plan, right? Or a strategic plan through a consultant, $150,000, right?
And these plans, these consultants don't have your best interest in mind. It's sort of a racket, right? To her point, it's the same plan over and over again. And I also wonder, when you look at your town bureaucrats, the paid folks, isn't this their job in a way? I know they'll say there's not a lot of
Yeah.
them, but this is sort of your job, right? You went to school for this. Many of them have advanced degrees, right? And you're telling me that you need somebody from out of town to tell you that the average person would like a safe community,
Right.
or a good school, or a park.
No, I completely understand that. I mean, it is a little bit silly when you think about that, to say you can't at least come up with that, or you already said you took all this community feedback. Well, why don't you process it and come up with it?
But it is a frenzy,
Yes.
right? Everybody else is doing it, and there's that grant
Yes.
money, and it'll go to somebody else.
I know.
Right? But this is the problem in our, if you look at the economy and everything else at a global scale, this money is your money ultimately. It is taxpayer dollars that could have been used elsewhere.
Right. So I'm going to focus back again on the word thriving, because it is just this theme. And we're going to take a look at this because this ties back into ICMA. So this is an ICMA webinar, kind of talking about to the city managers and those types across the country about where this thriving comes from and what's the benefit of it to local communities. Let's take a watch.
Thriving Communities, Federal Funding for Advancing Economic Mobility and Resilient Communities. Brought to you by the ICMA Research and Policy Team and Sustainable Strategies, DC.
Thriving communities is what we all want to be. I mean, for a municipal manager, that's essentially your job. How do you make your community thrive more economically, in terms of equity and inclusion, in terms of sustainability, in terms of all the values that are important to your local community? The theme Thriving Communities is the theme of the current Biden administration. A lot of their funding sources are organized around the idea of thriving communities and what it means. And you can see the graphic on the right. Those are, coming on a dozen federal agencies that are part of a federal interagency Thriving Communities network that they're trying to take a whole of government approach.
The whole government approach.
Yeah. I like the top bullet. It was something like educate, retain, and attract great people. Who gets to decide that? I don't know who that guy is, right?
Right.
What's his determination? I know nobody that lives in Shrewsbury said, you know what we need here? We need a lot of criminals, right? We need a lot of really terrible people.
I know.
Right? So again, common sense. But that's also, when you look at those things, there's a lot of code words in there that are maybe politically motivated.
Yep.
Maybe, I do think it goes back to money, right? These grants that the federal government puts in place. But there's a lot of kind of wording in those that are always suspect.
Right. And I think what he said there was, I think the reason why they're grabbing this word thriving and pushing it down is like, well, if the money says thriving is important, when I write a grant application, I can show a screenshot, include a PDF. Oh, look, our strategic initiative is thriving. Oh, they got thriving. Give them some money.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I look at it. And
It's buzzwords,
it's
right?
buzzwords,
You got to put the
right.
buzzwords in to get the
Right.
points on the test.
Right. And on federal level, where I think this first showed up, I'm going here to after COVID. All right. They actually created something called the Federal Plan for Equitable Long-Term Recovery and Resilience. Right. And if you look at, I've highlighted there the words again, and this is about language and the reoccurrence of that. So in our strategic plan, under the thriving topic there, all three of those bullets are coming from that federal plan. You talk about that concept of equitable, of community health, social, right? So a lot of these words are coming back up again. And this was created by 28 federal departments. And it's not just on a U.S. level. There's actually a global entity, right, which is called ICLEI, right? We used to be called ICLEI. It's still called ICLEI, but they call themselves Local Government for Sustainability. It's actually International Council on Local Environmental Initiatives.
That doesn't sound communist
Not at all. Right? And they talk about a sustainable urban future where communities and nature thrive as possible. And it actually kind of gets worse because another global entity, which really resonates with Shrewsbury residents, is the World Bank, right? So I'm going to go to the World Bank here and a video on the World Bank talking about what their newest initiative is. And I guess what word might be in there. Just
Thrive? I'm just
Let's
guessing.
take a listen and see.
The purpose of today's event is to launch the bank's new Global Sustainable Development Flagship Report, which is called Thriving, Making Cities Green, Resilient and Inclusive in a Changing Climate.
A new World Bank report uses data from across 10,000 cities globally to understand how climate change is impacting cities and the people who live in them. It provides a compass for policymakers on what can be done to create thriving, greener, more resilient, and more inclusive cities.
Yeah, those are those you hear it, high-level buzzwords today,
Yeah.
inclusive, thriving, sustainable, all those things. But what I want to show is in this same presentation, I'm going to play another clip here, and then we're going to have a dialogue around specific things you can see on the Massachusetts and Shrewsbury level that directly tie back to what they're saying here. So let's take another listen to the World Bank.
It's essential that we move away from that disorderly urbanization and instead chart a different path towards more integrated, compact, connected cities.
Local and national governments need to work together with the communities they serve to make effective use of 5 broad sets of policy instruments: information, incentives, insurance, integration, and investments, the 5 I's. Accurate information to help governments, individuals, and businesses make better decisions. Incentives to motivate people and businesses to take action. Insurance to minimize the financial impact of disasters. Integration to minimize unnecessary sprawl and bring people closer to jobs and opportunities.
Wow.
Yeah.
So there's a lot there, and I want to dig into this a little bit because people might say, "Well, what are you talking about?" Let's just rewind that a second. There was key things they said. Information. So when you talk about information, they're actually talking about more like surveillance. They're talking about things like, smart meters, digital currency, vaccine passports, things like that. They say, hey, we're going to make better information decisions with them, right?
Yeah.
And then we saw incentives.
Incentives is a stick, right? It's not a carrot. If you don't do certain things, we will not give you cash.
Right.
But if you follow the rules, our rules, you'll have access to possible dollars that we can give you.
Right. Or if you don't do certain things, you can't participate
Right.
in other
It's
things.
the club
as well.
members, again,
Exactly.
going back to the private club.
And then the last one I want to talk about is integration, right? And they talked about limiting the sprawl, right, of cities, and they show them shrinking together.
Yeah.
That to me, and we've talked a lot about this, we really go back to a few other episodes, MBTA Communities 3A.
Yeah.
That is 100% aligned, right, with the World Bank thriving integration plan, right?
Well, this is the war on suburbs,
Yeah.
right? There's especially Bernice von Brockhurst, she obviously does not like suburbs.
Yeah.
And Europeans, as a general rule, like to have those compact cities, right? So that came out of Europe, came to America, and they're like, we should just be all like everybody else. And it's that war on suburbs, right? You look at it today, there are a lot of politicians who don't believe you should live in a suburb with trees and with, agriculture that's not big agriculture owned, things like that.
Right. And I think the other part about this I always like to discuss is, they use it under the guise of either sustainability or climate, which are important things. But the key is that they're making a statement that by getting rid of suburbs, that is directly addressing like climate change,
Yeah.
or it's going to be more sustainable, which it's really like using that as this fear tactic to get you to do something you wouldn't ordinarily want to do.
Yeah.
So I really want to take a moment here to summarize, right? Because we've come to the end here and look at, again, what the vision statement and mission statement is. So we want to kind of refresh where this came from, right? This was not built purely on residents. We've shown that. The consultants we've used have done this other places. Those same concepts are being driven down by the federal level by federal agencies who believe this thriving concept and so forth is important. And that's coming from a global level by big global entities who think that these are wonderful things, big wealthy people from out the world that say, hey, I have a worldview, like you mentioned, that this is the right way to go. So we just want to be cognizant and try to show that path here, that while these are great that we have somewhat of a strategic plan, I think we should question, like, is this really the right plan for Shrewsbury?
I would argue that you should always try to go towards, a unique view, right? We're all the same, but in some ways we're all different, right? And so the idea is Shrewsbury in any town has a unique positioning, right? And rather than take sort of the onus from wherever, from who or from the federal government, we could have used all of these resources to just talk to people in town. I said, what do you think would make Shrewsbury a great town? And I think we could get 10 people in a room and they would probably be pretty closely aligned to the 40,000 people in town. It's really not that difficult. But we've taken that same, I go back to it's the same consultants, the same people, the same outcome, right? Because it's easy, and I would argue it's a bit lazy, and it has the buzzwords to get dollars.
Absolutely.
And we have a club, and like I said at the beginning, you're not in it.
Well, I want to thank everyone for tuning in today for our episode of the Unselects. If you want to give us some feedback, you can always email us at contact@theunselects.com. You can give us feedback on our Facebook page, and you can also check us out on Shrewsbury Media Connection YouTube page. So until the next episode, I'm Gregg Richards.
And I'm Brian Costello, and we are the Unselects.